1890, Mesa Verde Crossing, California, and the ferry crossing at the Sierra foothills was already shimmering with heat before dawn broke fully over the ridge. Olive Crawford stood on the plank dock with a rolled map in one hand and a leather satchel in the other, watching the muddy current of the American River churn past pilings that looked older than the war. She had promised the town council she would build a school if they backed her bid for the old mill property, and today was auction day. But the deed she needed to prove her claim had vanished from the land office sometime after midnight. The sheriff claimed he knew nothing, but Olive had seen him drinking with Bartholomew Merrick at the saloon last night, and Merrick owned the factory upstream that was turning the water brown and killing the fish. Elias Brennan appeared beside her without a sound, his boots making no noise on the weathered boards. He was a gunsmith, quiet and stern, with a reputation for keeping to himself and never missing a shot. The council had assigned him as her escort against his better judgment, and he made that clear the moment he spoke.
I am not a nursemaid, Miss Crawford. If you insist on chasing a thief in broad daylight, do it smart, or do it alone.
Olive turned to face him fully for the first time. He was taller than she expected, with dark brown hair that needed a trim and hazel eyes that looked right through her. His jaw was set hard, but his hands were careful on the rifle slung over his shoulder. She had heard he lost his brother in the war and came home to find his family ranch sold off by carpetbaggers. That kind of loss made a man either gentle or brutal, and she was not yet sure which he was.
Then help me be smart, Mr. Brennan. The auction is at sundown. If Merrick files first, he will own the mill and every water right downstream. He will foreclose on every widow and farmer who cannot pay his rates, and there will be no school, no fresh water, and no future for this town.
Elias studied her for a long moment, then shifted the rifle and gestured toward the trail that led upriver.
Merrick keeps his records in the factory office. If your deed is anywhere, it is there. But the man has guards, and the sheriff will not help you.
I know. That is why I need you.
He almost smiled, but it did not reach his eyes.
You do not need me. You need someone foolish enough to walk into a trap.
Then, it is lucky I found you.
They set out before the sun climbed high enough to bake the trail. The path upriver was narrow and lined with wild grasses that had turned brittle in the dry heat. Rattlesnakes liked the shade under the rocks, and Elias kept his eyes on the ground as much as the horizon. Olive walked behind him, her skirt kicking up dust with every step, and she did not complain once about the pace or the heat. That surprised him. Most women he knew would have turned back by now, or at least asked for water. She just kept moving, her jaw set the same way his was. After an hour, they reached the first bend where the river widened into a shallow ford, and Elias stopped to listen. The factory was another mile upstream, but sound carried strange in the canyon, and he wanted to know if anyone was following them. Olive knelt by the water and dipped her hand in, then pulled it back fast.
It is warm, and it smells like sulfur.
Merrick is dumping something. Probably lye from the tanning vats. It will kill everything downstream by autumn if no one stops him.
Then, we stop him. Today.
Elias looked at her, really looked, and saw the steel under the calm. She was not naive. She knew exactly what she was walking into, and she was doing it anyway. That kind of courage was rare, and it made him uneasy because it reminded him of his brother, who died charging a trench, because he believed it was the right thing to do. Elias had spent the last 5 years trying not to care about anything that much ever again.
If we get caught, Merrick will have us arrested. Or worse.
Then, we do not get caught.
They crossed the ford in silence, boots splashing through water that stung where it touched skin. On the far bank, the trail narrowed again and climbed toward the factory compound. Elias could see the main building now, a squat structure of weathered timber and corrugated iron with a chimney belching black smoke. There were 3 guards visible, 2 by the front gate and 1 walking the perimeter with a shotgun. Merrick was taking no chances. Olive crouched beside him behind a stand of manzanita and studied the layout.
The office is in the back. I saw the plans when the mill was still running. There is a side door that leads to the records room.
And how do you know Merrick has not changed the locks?
Because he is arrogant. Men like him do not believe anyone will challenge them.
Elias wanted to argue, but she was right. Merrick smiled in public and crushed people in private. And he never expected resistance, because he owned the sheriff and half the town council. That made him dangerous, but it also made him predictable.
Wait here. I will draw the guards off. When you hear the commotion, go in through the side door and find the deed. You have 5 minutes before they realize it is a diversion.
What kind of commotion?
The kind that makes men run toward trouble instead of away from it.
Before she could protest, Elias circled wide through the brush and came up on the far side of the compound. He found a stack of empty crates near the loading dock and kicked one hard enough to make it crash into the others. The noise echoed off the canyon walls, and within seconds, the guards were shouting and running toward the sound. Elias fired a single shot into the air, then took off downhill toward the river, leading them away from the building. Olive did not waste time. She ran low and fast to the side door, tested the handle, and found it unlocked, just as she had predicted. Inside, the records room was dim and smelled of ink and mildew. Rows of wooden filing cabinets lined the walls, each one labeled with faded letters. She went straight to the section marked land claims and started pulling drawers open. Most were empty or filled with useless receipts, but in the 3rd drawer, she found a folder with her name on it. Inside was the deed, along with a forged document that claimed Merrick had already purchased the property. She stuffed both papers into her satchel and turned to leave, but the door opened before she reached it. Bartholomew Merrick stepped into the records room with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He was a tall man with silver hair and a tailored suit that looked out of place in the dirt and heat of the canyon. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he spoke in the smooth, practiced tone of someone used to getting his way. The man who promises to help widows and then forecloses on their homes the moment they cannot pay. Merrick looked at Olive and the satchel in her hands, and his smile widened. He told her she was a foolish woman to think she could outsmart him. He said the deed was worthless because the auction was rigged, and the sheriff would arrest her the moment she tried to file it. He said she should leave Mesa Verde Crossing and never come back if she valued her safety. Olive did not move. She held the satchel tighter and met his gaze without flinching.
You are poisoning the river. You are stealing land from people who have nothing left, and you think you can buy your way into political power before the railroad survey is filed. But I will not let you.
Merrick laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the filing cabinets. He said she had no proof, no allies, and no future. Then, he stepped closer, and Olive saw the cruelty behind the charm. He reached for the satchel, but before his hand closed on the strap, the window behind him shattered. Elias came through in a shower of glass, rolled to his feet, and leveled his rifle at Merrick's chest.
Step back. Now.
Merrick froze, his smile gone. He raised his hand slowly and took a step toward the door, But Elias did not lower the rifle.
Call your guards off, or I will put a bullet through your knee and let you explain to the sheriff how you fell down the stairs.
Merrick hesitated, then shouted for the guards to stand down. The sound of boots on gravel stopped outside, and Elias backed toward Olive, keeping the rifle trained on Merrick the entire time.
Go. Now.
Olive did not need to be told twice. She ran for the side door, and Elias followed, slamming it behind them. They sprinted downhill toward the river, hearing shouts and gunfire behind them. But the guards were slow and disorganized, and by the time they reached the ford, the pursuit had fallen back. They crossed the river at a dead run, soaking themselves to the waist, and did not stop until they were back on the main trail with the factory out of sight. They stopped to catch their breath under a stand of cottonwood trees, and Olive pulled the deed from her satchel to make sure it was still intact. The paper was damp, but readable, and the forged document was folded beneath it. Elias leaned against a tree trunk and checked his rifle, then looked at her with something close to respect.
You were right about the door.
And you were right about the commotion.
We are not done. Merrick will have the sheriff waiting at the land office. We need another way to file the deed before sundown.
Olive thought for a moment, then pulled the map from her satchel and unrolled it on a flat rock. She traced a line from the river to the town, then tapped a spot near the edge of the map.
The telegraph office. If we can send a copy of the deed to the county seat before Merrick files his claim, the county recorder will have proof of fraud. The railroad survey team is due to arrive tomorrow, and they will need clean land titles to finalize the route. If Merrick is exposed before then, he loses everything.
That is assuming the telegraph operator is not in Merrick's pocket.
He is not. I know him. He lost his wife to fever last winter because the water was bad, and he blames Merrick. He will help us.
Elias nodded slowly, then pushed away from the tree.
Then we move fast. Sundown is 3 hours away, and the telegraph office is on the far side of town. If the sheriff is watching the land office, he will have men watching the telegraph office too.
Then we split up. You draw them off again, and I will file the telegram.
No. We stay together. If something goes wrong, I want to be there.
Olive looked at him, surprised by the firmness in his voice, and saw something shift in his expression. It was not just duty anymore. It was something else. Something neither of them had time to name. She nodded, and they set off down the trail at a steady pace, keeping to the shadows where the canyon walls blocked the worst of the afternoon heat. By the time they reached the edge of Mesa Verde Crossing, the sun was low enough to turn the dust on the main street golden. The town was small, just 2 rows of buildings facing each other across a dirt road wide enough for wagons to turn around. The land office was at the north end, the telegraph office at the south, and the saloon sat dead center like a warning. Elias spotted the sheriff's men almost immediately. 2 were lounging outside the land office, and another 2 were stationed near the telegraph office, trying to look casual and failing. Olive saw them too, and felt her stomach tighten.
They are waiting for us.
Let them wait. We will go through the back.
They circled around behind the buildings, moving through narrow alleys that smelled of horse manure and rotting wood. The telegraph office had a rear door that opened onto a small yard cluttered with broken crates and empty barrels. Elias tried the handle and found it locked, then knocked twice, paused, and knocked 3 more times. A moment later, the door opened a crack, and an older man with gray whiskers and tired eyes looked out. The telegraph operator recognized Olive and let them in without a word, locking the door behind them. Inside, The office was cramped and hot, with a single desk covered in papers and a telegraph key that clicked softly even when no one was using it. The operator listened to Olive's explanation, looked at the deed and the forged document, and nodded grimly. He said he would send the telegram immediately, but warned them that the county seat was 2 hours away by wire, and Merrick might intercept the reply if he had someone watching the line. Olive thanked him and handed over the deed copy, then turned to leave, but the operator stopped her. He said a telegram had arrived for Elias Brennan earlier that day, forwarded from the ranch address. He handed Elias a folded slip of paper, and Elias opened it slowly, his face going pale as he read.
It is from my brother's widow. She found a letter he wrote before he died. He asked me to let go of the past and build something new. He said revenge would not bring him back, and it would not save me either.
Olive watched him, saw the conflict in his eyes, and understood. Elias had been carrying his brother's death like a stone around his neck, and every decision he made was weighed against the debt he thought he owed. But the telegram had arrived too late to change the course of the day, and now he had to choose between the path he had been walking and the one standing right in front of him.
What will you do?
I will finish what we started, together.
The telegraph key clicked rapidly as the operator sent the message, and within minutes, a reply came back confirming receipt at the county seat. The operator wrote it down and handed it to Olive with a faint smile. He said the county recorder would review the claim first thing in the morning, and if the documents matched, Merrick's fraud would be exposed before the railroad survey team arrived. Olive felt the tension in her chest ease slightly, but she knew they were not safe yet. The sheriff's men were still outside, and Merrick would not give up without a fight. They slipped out the back door and moved quickly through the allies, staying low and keeping to the shadows. The sun was touching the tops of the hills now, and the sky was turning the color of fire. Elias led the way, his rifle ready, and Olive followed with the satchel pressed tight against her side. They were halfway to the edge of town when they heard boots pounding on the street behind them. The sheriff's men had figured out they were gone, and the chase was on. Elias grabbed Olive's hand and pulled her into a narrow gap between two buildings, pressing them both against the wall as the men ran past. They waited until the footsteps faded, then moved again, faster this time, cutting through backyards and empty lots until they reached the old dance hall at the south end of town. The building was dark and locked, but Elias kicked the door open and pulled Olive inside, then barred it behind them. The dance hall was empty and smelled of dust and old wood. Rows of benches lined the walls, and a small stage sat at the far end with a fiddle resting on a chair. Lanterns hung from the rafters, unlit, and the windows were shuttered tight. Elias crossed to the nearest window and looked out through a crack in the boards.
They are searching the buildings. We have maybe 10 minutes before they find us.
Then what?
Then we fight. Or we talk. I am done running.
Olive set the satchel down and walked to the center of the room, her boots echoing on the plank floor. She looked at Elias, really looked, and saw the man behind the walls he had built. The war had taken his brother, and the carpetbaggers had taken his home, and he had spent 5 years trying to keep the world at arm's length because caring hurt too much. But today, he had chosen to care anyway, and that choice had brought him here, standing in an empty dance hall with a woman who believed in building schools and fighting for what was right, even when the odds were impossible.
You said your brother asked you to let go. What did he mean?
He meant I was holding on to anger like it was the only thing keeping me alive. He was right. I have been so focused on what I lost that I forgot there might be something worth finding.
And have you found it?
I think I am starting to.
Outside, the voices of the sheriff's men grew louder, and Elias moved away from the window. He crossed to where Olive stood and set the rifle down, then took off his hat and held it in his hands like he was not sure what to do with it.
If we get out of this, what will you do?
I will build the school, and I will make sure Merrick never poisons another river or forecloses on another widow. What will you do?
I will help you. If you will have me.
I will. But I need to know you mean it. I need to know this is not just about finishing what we started today.
It is not. I thought I was helping you because the council asked me to, but that stopped being true about an hour after we left the ferry. You are brave, and you are stubborn, and you do not quit even when you should, and I have not felt this alive in 5 years.
Olive felt her throat tighten, and she stepped closer to him. Close enough to see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, and the way his hands were shaking, just slightly.
I need you to know something too. I am not looking for a protector or a partner who will let me lead and then take over when things get hard. I am looking for someone who will stand beside me and trust me to carry my share. Can you do that?
I already have.
The voices outside stopped, and the door to the dance hall rattled hard. Someone shouted for them to come out, and Olive heard the sheriff's voice, slurred and angry, demanding she hand over the deed. Elias picked up his rifle and moved to the door, but Olive stopped him with a hand on his arm.
Wait. Let me talk to them.
They will arrest you.
Only if they can prove I stole the deed. But I did not steal it. I recovered it. And the county recorder has already confirmed receipt of the telegram. Merrick's fraud is on record now. The sheriff knows that, and he knows if he arrests me without cause, he will be implicated too.
Elias hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. Olive unbarred the door and opened it slowly, facing the sheriff and 3 of his deputies. The sheriff was a heavy man with a red face and a badge that looked tarnished in the fading light. He started to speak, but Olive cut him off.
The deed has been filed with the county recorder. The forgery has been reported. If you arrest me now, you will be charged as an accessory to fraud and theft of public lands. The railroad survey team arrives tomorrow, and they will need clean titles to finalize the route. Merrick is finished, and you know it.
The sheriff stared at her, his face going from red to purple, and for a moment, Olive thought he might grab her anyway. But then one of the deputies whispered something in his ear, and the sheriff stepped back, cursing under his breath. He said she was lucky this time, but she had better watch her back because Merrick had friends in high places. Then he turned and walked away, taking his men with him. Olive closed the door and leaned against it, her legs suddenly weak. Elias was beside her in an instant, his hands steadying her shoulders.
You did it.
We did it.
They stood there, in the dim light of the dance hall, the last rays of the sun slipping through the cracks in the shutters and painting the floor in stripes of gold. Outside, the town was settling into evening, and the sound of the river drifted up from the canyon below. Olive looked at Elias and saw the question in his eyes, the same question she had been asking herself since they crossed the ford that morning.
What happens now?
I do not know. But I know I do not want to walk away.
Neither do I.
Elias reached for her hand, and she took it. Feeling the calluses on his palm, and the warmth of his fingers as they closed around hers. He pulled her gently toward him, and she stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must hear it.
I thought I could keep my distance. I thought if I did not let myself care, I would not lose anyone else. But I was wrong. I already care. I have cared since the first day you walked into my shop and asked me to teach you how to load a rifle.
I remember. You said I would shoot myself in the foot.
And you said you would rather die trying than die waiting.
Olive smiled, and Elias lifted his free hand to her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. The gesture was so tender it made her chest ache.
I do not want to lose you.
You will not. I am not going anywhere.
He leaned down and kissed her, slow and careful, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. Olive closed her eyes and let herself fall into it, into him, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. When they finally pulled apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin.
What will you do about the school?
I will build it. The town council promised to back me if I could secure the land, and now the land is secure. Merrick cannot touch it. I will start as soon as the railroad approves the route.
And what about Merrick himself? He will not let this go.
No. But he will have to be careful. The county recorder has the evidence, and the railroad will not deal with a man under investigation for fraud. If he comes after me now, he will only make things worse for himself.
He is the kind of man who burns everything when he loses.
I know. But I have you. And I have a town full of people who are tired of being cheated. We will watch for him.
Elias nodded, and they stood there in the empty dance hall, holding each other as the last light faded, and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Olive felt the weight of the day lifting, replaced by something lighter, something that felt like hope. She thought about the women she had promised to teach, the children who would learn to read in the schoolhouse she would build, the future she had fought so hard to protect. And she thought about Elias, the man who had risked everything to stand beside her, even when he did not have to.
There is one more thing.
What?
The telegram. The one that arrived this afternoon. You never told me what it said.
Elias stiffened, and Olive saw the shadow pass over his face again. He let go of her hand and stepped back, turning toward the window. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Olive wondered if she had pushed too far. But then he spoke, his voice low and rough.
It was from a man in Denver, a friend of my brother. He said, the man who killed my brother was found dead 2 weeks ago in a saloon fight. Someone else got to him before I could.
Olive felt her breath catch. She moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his again.
And how do you feel?
I do not know. I spent 3 years planning what I would do when I found him. I thought killing him would fix something, bring my brother back or make the pain stop. But now, he is dead, and nothing has changed. My brother is still gone, and I am still here.
You are still here. And you are. Alive. And you have a choice now.
What choice?
To let the anger go. To build something instead of tearing something down. To stay.
Elias turned to look at her, and in the dim light, she saw the tears in his eyes. He did not try to hide them, and she did not look away.
I do not know if I can.
You can. I have seen you. You are not the man you think you are. You are better.
He pulled her close again, and this time, he held her tight, his face buried in her hair. Olive wrapped her arms around him and let him hold on, feeling the tension drain out of his body as the minutes passed. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier.
If I stay, I will need work.
You can work for me. I will need help building the school. And I will need someone to teach the older students how to defend themselves. You are the best shot in the territory.
And what will people say when they see the gunsmith courting the seamstress?
Let them say what they want. I do not care.
Elias laughed, a low, rough sound that made Olive smile. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and she saw the warmth in his eyes, the softness that had been hidden beneath the sternness.
I love you.
I love you too.
They kissed again, slower this time, and when they finally broke apart, the stars were bright overhead, and the night was full of the sound of crickets and the distant rush of the river. Olive took Elias by the hand and led him toward the door, and together they stepped out into the warm night air. The town was quiet now, most of the lamps extinguished, and the streets were empty except for a stray dog nosing through the dust. Olive looked up at the sky and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. She had fought for this moment, for this future, and she had won. And she had found something she had not expected to find, something she had thought she would never have.
Come on. Let us go home.
Where is home?
Wherever we are together.
Elias smiled, and they walked down the steps of the dance hall and into the night, their hands clasped tight, their shadows stretching long behind them in the silver light of the moon. She promised to build a school, but the deed was stolen at Sundown. Mesa Verde Crossing, 1890. A seamstress fights to recover a stolen land deed before sundown, while a quiet gunsmith wrestles with his past. When a factory owner rigs the system to steal public land, two broken people must choose between revenge and love. A Wild West romance of danger, resilience, and second chances. Subscribe for more authentic frontier love stories. Wild West romance, frontier love story, 1890s California, Western historical fiction, cowboy romance, seamstress hero, land theft story, gunsmith romance, stolen deed plot, Sierra foothills tale, authentic Western, resilient heroine, second chance love, revenge versus love, happy ending romance, colorized late 1800s American West photograph, natural light, gentle contrast, slightly soft focus, subtle film grain, faint dust or scratches, slight vignetting, no text, no watermark. A stunning woman in her late 20s, with chestnut brown hair pinned in a practical bun, bright hazel eyes, slender athletic build, wearing a simple dark blue cotton dress with rolled sleeves and a leather satchel across her shoulder. Standing close beside a handsome, rugged man in his early 30s with dark brown hair, strong jawline, steel gray eyes, broad shoulders, wearing a tan work shirt, dark vest, worn gun belt, and a dusty, wide-brimmed cowboy hat. Both facing the camera with intense, determined expressions as she clutches a folded document to her chest, and he protectively holds her shoulder. Her hand on his holstered revolver. Background shows the exterior of a weathered wooden dance hall at sunset with golden light streaming through gaps in the shutters. Dust swirling in the warm evening breeze. A hitching post with a saddled horse in the midground. distant canyon ridges glowing amber under the setting sun, and a sheriff's silhouette, Wete retreating in the far background, warm beige, an amber color palette with darker shadows. Photorealistic cinematic style, shot on cinema camera, natural golden hour lighting, shallow depth of field with soft bokeh background, warm beige and amber color grading. Looks like a film still from a premium Western romance movie. Authentic 1800s period photography aesthetic, professional portrait photog, RAFEquality.o / through his palm and the warmth of his skin.
I spent 3 years thinking about nothing but finding the man who killed my brother. I followed every lead, burned every bridge, and pushed away anyone who tried to stop me. And when I finally found him, I learned he was already dead. Hanged for another crime 2 years before I even started looking. All that time, all that anger, and it meant nothing.
It meant you loved your brother.
It meant I wasted 3 years of my life chasing a ghost. And then I came here, and I told myself I would keep my head down and just make guns and stay out of trouble. But then you walked into my shop with that map and that crazy plan, and I knew I was going to follow you anyway.
Why?
Because you reminded me what it feels like to believe in something real. Not revenge, not anger, just something good and worth fighting for. And because when I look at you, I do not see the past anymore. I see the future.
Olive felt her throat tighten, and she blinked hard against the sting in her eyes. She had spent so long, being careful, being cautious, measuring every word and every risk. And now here was this man, who had walked beside her through fire, and never once asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was.
I spent my whole life being told I was too stubborn, too reckless, too much trouble. My father said I would never find a man who could stand me for more than a week. And maybe he was right. But I do not want a man who just stands me. I want someone who stands with me.
I am standing with you.
I know.
He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. The dance hall was quiet now, the last of the sunlight fading from the walls, and somewhere outside, a dog barked and a wagon creaked past on the road. Olive closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of dust and leather and gunpowder, and she thought about the school she was going to build, and the children who would learn to read there, and the town that would grow up around it. She thought about the river crossing, and the ferry, and the long road that had brought her here. And she thought about the man whose arms were wrapped around her now, solid and warm and real.
What are you thinking?
I am thinking about tomorrow. The railroad survey team arrives, and we need to be there when they do. We need to make sure Merrick does not try anything else.
And after that?
After that, I start clearing the land for the school, and I need to hire a carpenter. And I need to order lumber. And I need to find someone who can teach mathematics, because I am terrible at it.
I can teach mathematics.
You can?
My brother was a school teacher before the war. He taught me.
Olive pulled back and looked up at him, and she saw the faint smile on his lips and the light in his eyes, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Something warm and bright and almost too big to hold.
Then I guess I need to hire you.
I guess you do.
She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, and he bent his head and kissed her, slow and careful and full of promise. The dance hall was empty and dark around them, but Olive did not care. She had spent her whole life fighting for things that other people said were impossible. And now, she had won something better than land or money or victory. She had won a partner, someone who would walk beside her and carry his share, and never ask her to be anything less than herself. When they finally pulled apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers and spoke quietly.
I love you, Olive Crawford.
I love you too, Elias Brennan.
They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the darkening hall, and then Olive smiled and took his hand.
Come on. We have a long day tomorrow, and I need to sleep.
Where are we going?
The boarding house. Mrs. Kelly always has a room for me. And tomorrow, we will meet the survey team and finalize the deed and start building the school. Together.
Together.
They walked out into the night, hand in hand, and the stars were bright overhead, scattered across the sky like scattered silver coins. The town was quiet, the streets empty, and the river murmured softly in the canyon below. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound echoed off the canyon walls and faded into silence. Olive looked up at the stars and thought about all the nights she had spent alone, planning and dreaming and hoping. And she thought about the man walking beside her now, steady and strong, and hers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights, new risks. But tonight, she was happy, and she was loved, and that was enough. They reached the boarding house just as the last lamp was dimmed in the front window. Mrs. Kelly, a stout woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, opened the door before Olive could knock. She looked at Olive, then at Elias, then back at Olive, and a knowing smile crossed her face. She said she had 2 rooms available, but Olive could hear the question underneath the words. Olive felt her cheeks warm, but she met Mrs. Kelly's eyes and said 1 room would be fine, and Elias squeezed her hand gently. Mrs. Kelly nodded and led them upstairs to a small, clean room with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the street. She set a lamp on the table and left without another word, closing the door softly behind her. Olive turned to face Elias, and he set his hat on the table and looked at her with an expression she could not quite name. It was tender and uncertain and full of something that made her heart beat faster. She stepped closer and put her hand on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm.
Are you sure about this? About me?
I have never been more sure of anything in my life.
I am not easy to live with. I argue. I push. I do not give up.
I know. That is why I love you.
She smiled and reached up to kiss him, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear, no doubt. They had fought for this, earned this, chosen this. The lamp burned low as they held each other, and the night stretched out around them, quiet and safe and theirs. When morning came, the sun rose over the canyon and painted the hills in gold and orange. And Olive woke to find Elias already awake, sitting by the window and watching the street below. She sat up, and he turned to her, and the look in his eyes was calm and steady and full of love.
The survey team will be here by noon. We should get ready.
I know. But first, I want to say something.
What is it?
Thank you. For staying. For fighting with me. For choosing me.
You do not have to thank me. I would choose you 1,000 times over.
They dressed quickly and went downstairs, where Mrs. Kelly had prepared a simple breakfast of eggs and bread and strong coffee. The old woman watched them with a satisfied smile and said nothing. But Olive saw the approval in her eyes. They ate in comfortable silence, and then they walked together down to the ferry crossing, where a small crowd had already gathered. The railroad survey team had arrived early, 3 men in dark suits carrying leather cases and surveying equipment. The lead surveyor was a tall, thin man with spectacles and a serious expression, and he listened carefully as Olive explained the situation with the deed and the forgery and Merrick's fraud. He took notes and asked questions, and then he nodded and said the deed was valid and the land was hers, free and clear. Merrick tried to intervene, arriving with his lawyer and his forged documents, but the surveyor cut him off and said the county recorder had already confirmed the fraud and the matter was closed. Merrick's face went pale, then red, and he started to shout, but the surveyor ignored him and turned back to Olive. He said the railroad would need to purchase a right-of-way through her land, and he was prepared to offer a fair price. Olive looked at Elias, and he nodded, and she accepted the offer. The surveyor shook her hand and said the contract would be ready by the end of the week. As the crowd dispersed, Olive felt the tension drain from her body, and she leaned against Elias, suddenly exhausted. He wrapped his arm around her and held her close, and she closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of dust and leather and sun-warmed cotton.
You did it.
We did it.
What now?
Now we start building. The school. The town. Our life. Together.
Elias smiled and kissed the top of her head, and they stood there by the river, watching the water flow past and the sun climb higher in the sky. Merrick stormed away, shouting threats that no one listened to, and the sheriff avoided their eyes and disappeared into the saloon. The townspeople came up one by one to congratulate Olive and shake Elias's hand, and a few of the women asked when the school would open, and Olive told them by fall if they could manage it. The day stretched on, hot and bright, and by afternoon, Olive and Elias were standing on the land she had fought so hard to keep, looking at the empty field and imagining the building that would stand there soon. Olive pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil and started sketching a rough plan, and Elias stood beside her, offering suggestions and asking questions. They worked together, easy and natural, and by the time the sun began to set, they had a plan, a budget, and a list of materials. Olive folded the paper and tucked it into her satchel, and then she turned to Elias and smiled.
I could not have done this without you.
Yes, you could have. But I am glad you did not have to.
So am I.
They walked back toward town as the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared overhead. The air was cooling, and the smell of wood smoke drifted from the chimneys along the main street. Olive felt a deep sense of peace settle over her, a feeling she had not known in years. She had won her fight, secured her land, and found a man who loved her for exactly who she was. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she was content. They reached the boarding house just as the lamps were being lit, and Mrs. Kelly met them at the door with a knowing smile and a plate of warm biscuits. She said supper would be ready soon, and she had saved them a table by the window. Olive thanked her and followed Elias inside, her hand still tucked safely in his. The dining room was warm and filled with the smell of stew and fresh bread. Other boarders sat at scattered tables, speaking quietly, and a lantern hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the worn wooden floorboards. Olive and Elias sat by the window, and Mrs. Kelly brought them bowls of beef stew, thick slices of bread, and hot coffee. They ate slowly, talking in low voices about the school and the town and the life they would build together. Elias told her about his plans to expand the gunsmith shop, to hire an apprentice and take on more repair work. Olive told him about the seamstress work she would continue, the orders she had waiting, and the women in town who had promised to help with the school fundraising.
We will need desks and books and slates. And a stove for winter, and a bell for the roof.
We will get them. One step at a time.
You make it sound easy.
It is not easy. But it is possible. And we are not doing it alone.
Olive smiled and reached across the table, and Elias took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. They sat like that for a long moment, holding hands across the table, and Olive felt the last of her fear and doubt slip away. She had fought for this, risked everything for this, and now it was real. The deed was filed, the land was hers, and the man she loved was sitting across from her, steady and sure and committed to the same dream. After supper, they walked out onto the porch of the boarding house and stood together in the cool night air. The street was quiet, and the stars were bright overhead, scattered thick across the black sky. Olive leaned against Elias, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close.
Thank you for staying.
I am not going anywhere.
Good. Because I need you.
I need you too.
They stood there in the darkness, listening to the sound of the river and the distant call of an owl, and Olive felt a deep sense of gratitude and joy. She had won her fight, found her love, and claimed her future. Tomorrow, the work would begin. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning arrived with birdsong in the pale light of dawn. Olive woke early, dressed quickly, and met Elias outside the boarding house. They walked together to the field where the school would stand, carrying surveying tools and marking stakes. The railroad survey team had already arrived, 3 men in dark suits with notebooks and measuring chains, and they greeted Olive with polite nods. She presented the filed deed and the telegram from the county recorder, and the lead surveyor examined both documents carefully before nodding his approval. He said the land was clear, the title was legitimate, and they would include the school site in their official map. Merrick had tried to file a counterclaim that morning, but the recorder had rejected it on grounds of fraud. The surveyor said Merrick was now under investigation, and the sheriff had resigned. Olive felt a wave of relief wash over her, and she thanked the surveyor with a steady voice. After the survey team left, Olive and Elias spent the rest of the morning marking the boundaries of the school building, driving stakes into the hard ground and stretching string between them. By noon, they had outlined the foundation, and Olive stood back to admire their work.
It is really happening.
It is.
I still cannot believe it.
Believe it. You earned this.
Olive turned to him, and she saw the pride and love in his eyes, and she felt her heart swell with gratitude and joy. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, and he held her close, his chin resting on the top of her head.
Thank you for believing in me.
Thank you for letting me stand beside you.
They stood there, in the middle of the empty field, holding each other under the bright summer sky, and Olive knew that this was only the beginning. The school would be built, the children would come, and the town would grow stronger. But more than that, she had found a partner who loved her, trusted her, and would walk beside her through every challenge and every victory. She pulled back and looked up at Elias, and she smiled.
Let us go home.
Home. I like the sound of that.
They walked back toward town hand in hand, leaving the marked field behind them, and the sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky. The river sparkled in the canyon below. The mountains stood tall and steady on the horizon, and the future stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. Olive Crawford had come to Mesa Verde Crossing with nothing but a dream and a sewing kit. And now she had a school, a town that believed in her, and a man who loved her with all his heart. She had fought for her place in this wild, hard land, and she had won. Together, they would build something beautiful, something lasting, something worth every risk and every sacrifice. And as they walked home through the dusty streets of Mesa Verde Crossing, Olive knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the person she was meant to be with. And that was the greatest victory of all.